This will all be suppressed again and again and again until you can't suppress it anymore. And it will not be a matter of party affiliation or parties in power. It'll simply start to happen on the streets. The British public are being pushed beyond our endurance. And if we are waiting for a political outlet, I think that a large number of people will start to think we don't have a political outlet. The Home Secretary and the government say things, and yet they do not happen. The Labour Party say things and promise things, and yet they do not happen. I'm old enough to remember when the last Labour government was ratcheting up mass immigration into the UK, talked about the dangers of mass immigration.
A lot of people have said the Palestine protests should be banned. I don't think that is the fundamental question here. The question is, why are so many of those at these protests in this country in the first place, let alone here protesting? If we didn't import them to start with, we wouldn't have large sections of our society that care nothing for our customs and culture taken to the streets in this manner. People who have more loyalty and affinity to Palestine than to here. We are now reaping what we have sown. We need to see those leaders responsible in court for high treason on this one. They have acted against the interests of this nation. Deliberately or indifferently, they have jeopardized our existence. Douglas Murray has been talking very forcefully on this one, as you'll hear.
Why should we live with these people? Why should they be here? My forebears didn't fight off generation after generation of enemies, only to have these enemies given the right to remain here. We'd have no need of them. Our country has not benefited from them. Get them out. Get them out. And if the government will not do it, at some point the people will do it. And I would submit that will be much uglier.
He warned us about this in the opening line of his 2015 book. I've never seen him so angry. He's talking about rounding up all Hamas sympathizers and deporting them en masse. As he says, more important than our liberal values is our existence. We didn't ask for this to be forced upon us by those who actively hate this country. Is it time to start reversing historic immigration? That's a discussion to be had. Lefties will say it's fascist, like they do everything. No, you importing these people in the first place was totalitarian. They want no borders and an end to the nation state of Britain, and they'll just call anyone who disagrees fascist. They don't have a leg to stand on this one. We know Labour imported people deliberately in record numbers because it meant more voters for them, and meant more people who didn't feel an affinity to Britain. It was a tactic to weaken our nation. Importing people for more votes and your own political gain, and then calling it democracy when you win, is a lie. That is not democracy. If they can do that, that means the other side is perfectly justified in deporting for their own political gain all those Labour imported. The more they deport, fewer voters voting for Labour. And they will be well within their rights to call that a restoration of true democracy. Douglas Murray is really talking tough on this. After seeing some of the footage of these protests, I can see why, especially when the lefties refuse to admit there is quite a bit of hate at these protests. Desperate times now call for desperate measures. Take a listen. No doubt he is speaking for millions.
We have an open border. And there is, despite the fact, there was a poll done in recent weeks which showed that 92% of Conservative voters and 70% of Labour voters, which was higher than I expected, support deporting people who glorify terrorism. And yet we sit here, all three of us, knowing full well, as everybody watching this does, that despite the fact that we have a quote-unquote far-right government, that is never, ever going to happen.
Well, it might not happen under this government, but it'll happen under one in the future. The first thing is the British public are totally right. I do not want to live in a country with Hamas supporters. I want them deported. I want them chucked out. Simple. And I will do everything I can to ensure that happens. I am fed up, by the way, of the centrist dad hand-wringing era, where people say, oh, but might it be against our liberal values? And might our liberalism... I'm not as interested in that as I am in Britain remaining Britain. I am much more interested in that. At every time of national emergency in our nation's history, we gave something up to survive. We did in the Napoleonic Wars, we did in the wars of the 20th century, and we will have to now. This is the thing we give up, extending tolerance to people who do not extend it back to us. It should be over, that era. The first person who must be deported from the UK and have his citizenship withdrawn is a man called Mohammed Sawalha who lives in North London. I'm happy to start handing out his address if need be. Mohammed Sawalha is a former military commander of Hamas in the West Bank. He has been living peacefully in the UK, that is undisturbedly, I should say, undisturbed in the UK for many years now. Under the last Labour government, he seems to have got UK citizenship. Now, to get UK citizenship, you have, among other things, to show that you're a person of good character. I would submit that if you are a military commander of Hamas, you are not a person of good character. Now, what is to be done about this man? He is currently not in the UK. He is in Istanbul. And again, I'm very happy to give out his location, should people want it. I do not want that man back in my country. I don't want him here. If he arrives back here, he should be arrested and deported. Now, I would also like him to go to the Gaza. Mohammed Sawalha should not be in the UK. The name of this man is now out there. It was put on the front page of the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago. I immediately got my lawyers to write to the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the Attorney General, saying that if they do not prosecute him, I will get a prosecution myself. This man cannot live in my country. He will be the first, and we will see how many more need to come after him. He should not have British citizenship. We do not want him here. We have not benefited from his being here.